This week, President Obama nominated his chief counterterrorism advisor, John Brennan, to be the next director of the CIA. At first glance, Brennan has the perfect resume for the job. He's a 25-year veteran of the agency. He speaks fluent Arabic and served as the CIA's deputy executive director from 2001 to 2003, director of the Terrorist Threat Integration Center from 2003 to 2004, and as director of the Interim National Counterterrorism Center from 2004 to 2005. Brennan also seemed to have the perfect resume in 2008 when his name was floated to head the agency. Back then, however, the absolutely central role he held at the CIA post 9/11 and his full-throated, on-the-record defense of the Bush-era policies of rendition and enhanced interrogation techniques short of waterboarding, which he says is torture, caused genuine outrage. Here's Brennan in a 2007 interview.
The CIA has acknowledged that it has detained about 100 terrorists since 9/11, and about a third of them have been subjected to what the CIA refers to as enhanced interrogation tactics, and only a small proportion of those have in fact been subjected to the most serious types of enhanced procedure. There have been a lot of information that has come out from these interrogation procedures that the agency has in fact used against the real hardcore terrorists. It has saved lives, and let's not forget, these are hardened terrorists who have been responsible for 9/11, who have shown no remorse at all for the deaths of 3,000 innocents.
In 2008, the backlash against Brennan was so strong he withdrew his name for consideration, saying, "It has been immaterial to the critics that I've been a strong opponent of many of the policies of the Bush administration, such as the preemptive war in Iraq and coercive interrogation tactics, to include waterboarding." He was instead appointed to be the president's chief counterterrorism advisor. In this role, he has been described by many as the architect of Obama's signature war on terror policy, targeted killing largely through drone strikes. 4 years later, the concerns about having Brennan head the CIA are muted, and we can only hope the confirmation process will bring the necessary accounting of his role in not only President Bush's war on terror, but in President Obama's as well. Joining me now is Eli Lake, senior national security reporter for Newsweek and the Daily Beast, and Chris Anders, senior legislative counsel at the ACLU's Washington, D.C. Legislative Office. Great to have you both here.
Great, nice to have you.
Eli, from the perspective of the universe of the security folks. And let me say this before I start this conversation. I really wanted to have CIA people at the table today, and we basically couldn't get it done because in order to speak about this stuff, they have to get clearance with the agency, and they said there was a backlog. So we were trying very desperately, our incredibly diligent booking producers, trying to get CIA people, because I think the institutional bureaucratic perspective on this is really important. And let me just express my frustration with the fact that we can't have them here, A, and B, that all of these conversations happen shrouded behind secrecy. So we're going to have this conversation. There's all this secret information we don't have access to, and that's massively frustrating from the perspective of a democratic citizen. So that said, Eli, where do you think folks around the sort of security apparatus, the kind of frontline officers, the civil servants in the CIA, where do you think they are on this question of both Brennan and the legacy of the Bush years and the torture regime in terms of how they think about it?
It's hard for me to give you a kind of universal, this is what everybody in the CIA thinks, but I think that there was clearly a sense that when there was a question or a potential for legal action in some capacity against CIA officers, even if personally I know that there are plenty of CIA officers who disagreed with these enhanced interrogation techniques, but they felt that it was way too far, that they were basically being asked to do something for their country, and then they potentially would have to, many of them have had to take out insurance plans because they thought that they would be sued in some capacity as well. So that was something that I think was a bullet that was somewhat dodged. But really, that's Leon Panetta, who takes over as the director of the agency and then becomes its biggest advocate. And eventually, the Justice Department's re-review of those cases and that issue has largely sort of subsided. I think Brennan probably
subsided, meaning the Justice Department just says we're not going to prosecute anymore.
Well, what I gather, and I guess Chris could, is that they looked into it and they decided not to go forward or reopen any of these particular cases. But that I know was a huge issue, and that really does get to the whole functionality of the agency. If you have officers who think that when they're told to do something, I mean, the CIA, keep in mind, it breaks the law internationally.
Right.
And espionage is against the law in other countries. Okay. So if you ask someone to break the law and then you tell them that they could be facing consequences later on, I mean, how are you going to have a functioning...
We should note there's a distinction between breaking the law in another country and breaking the law in the U.S.
I agree. But the point is that, the CIA has a legacy of breaking lots of laws in order to kind of do what's sometimes called direct action, which is a euphemism for things like coups and assassination plots and other things like that. And there's a legitimate question. Will CIA officers be held accountable in the courts later on for following orders?
What do we know about first of all, I guess I would ask you, how germane do you think John Brennan's record in the CIA during the Bush years is to his appointment?
I think it's very germane. And if you look at during the Bush administration, there were about a dozen officials who were sent up by the Bush administration to the Senate for basically promotions, for better jobs, and looking for Senate confirmations of them. The Senate, with the exception of Alberto Gonzales, I think rejected every single one of them, or they withdrew on their own. And they had records in some cases, I think, that probably were less extensive than what John Brennan has. For this Senate, it should take that same approach that it took with the Bush nominees. He was a central player at the CIA. He was deputy executive director for a while. He was chief of staff to Porter Goss, Bush's CIA director. He knew everything. I think it's safe to say he knew everything about the torture program, about the secret prisons that Porter Goss knew.
I want you to hold that thought. I want to ask about accountability and also John Brennan's role in the last 4 years as counterterrorism advisor right after we take this break.